Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. I'm going to speak for about 25 minutes, and then we're going to have a brief video, actually two, a short one, 2 clips from 60 Minutes with my mother in it, and then one much more formally done that is an excerpt of a current documentary that I think you all might find of interest. Also, of course, this subject is pretty important to me, and I was up rewriting all of this from midnight to 2 a.m., and I edited it on the drive here from Richmond, so I may get emotional here and there. I haven't prepared myself really to actually say these words in front of a lot of people, although it's certainly not my first rodeo at this. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. I'd like to start by telling you about my perspective on this story of Jerry and Jane Denton, then give you a sequence of major events in their life, then explain how they did it and how you can do it and how you should do it. There are many ways to serve our fellow man: clergy, teachers, doctors, nurses, police, first responders. Heck, even lawyers can serve our mankind. We have a lot of lawyers in our family. But the military involves the greatest potential sacrifice and earns our highest respect. So before I go any further, as Pat said, we all have our stories. Please hold your applause, and let me particularly ask for just Vietnam veterans to stand who happen to be here today. Please stand, Vietnam veterans only. Now you got to stand up. Okay. Please take a careful look. Veterans of this war, particularly those, please stand, the veterans of this war, particularly those who were not POWs, have yet to get a fraction of the respect and honor they deserve. And now would all veterans and those currently serving please stand. And finally, any family members of a veteran, please stand. Any family member. This is the cost of freedom. God bless you all for your sacrifices. Thank you. I am the 6th of 7 children. In our family, the boys are my older brothers, Jerry, Don, Jim, and Bill. And then came Madeline, Michael, and Mary, the M Society, importantly supported by Mom. Vitally important there. There's some disagreement on this, but I'm convinced that M Society was created solely to protect me from my older brothers until I got bigger than all of them. We were a typical Virginia Beach Southern Catholic military family with a very wide range of personalities. In the summer of 1965, when Dad was shot down, the eldest, Jerry, was 17. I was 5, and Mary was a year and a half. I'd never met him. When Dad returned from captivity after almost 8 years, Jerry was a married Vietnam combat veteran in law school. Don was a married anti-war Peace Corps volunteer and teacher overseas. I was 1 month from my 14th birthday, and Mary was in 3rd grade. Of course, anyone at least my age recalls the radical social changes during those years and will understand that our intense circumstances often combusted into strong opinions on just about everything then and now, including Vietnam. Although I was young through those years, I later attended a military college, served as a naval officer, was an active conservative Republican, and I served on Dad's humanitarian foundation. We also shared various interests: tennis and golf, boating, family history. And after my midlife faith awakening, we even shared a lifelong dedication to the sovereign order of Malta, which took me to Lourdes and has since brought me here. My point here is that my common ground with our dad gives me a good handle of what he would say to you today, and that's what's important, really, of course. So I will speak in his voice as best I can. I honestly think this is very close to what you would hear from him today. Had he not, after all he went through, passed away in 2014 at 89 years of age, the longest lived male in his direct line back to at least 1635. Go figure how he lasted so much longer than his own bloodline. Almost a decade after Vietnam, I graduated from VMI with a Navy commission. I married Catherine Page Addison and raised 2 children who now are grown and married with their own children. We live a normal life, whatever that is. And I suspect most of you live normal lives. Eventually and inevitably, those normal lives are shocked by all manner of extraordinary, difficult circumstances. Loss of health, heart, love, or life. Now with a grandfather's perspective, fairly new grandfather's perspective, I will share my parents' service and sacrifice. They too were living normal lives. They were not chosen after specialized preparation for such difficult circumstances. Our parents did what they could, and it turned out to be something great. The point of telling you this story is to encourage each of you in any adversity you face today or will face. We hope the Denton story is deeply inspirational. Jerry and Jane Denton were born and raised in Mobile, Alabama. They formed their character in the churches, schools, sports, beautiful waters of that community. Dad had a tough youth when his parents divorced in a heavily Catholic, very small town. And his mother, Irene, God bless her, raised 3 boys very well on the pay of a hotel secretary. He met Mother on a church hayride. It was love at first sight, and ever since. Soon after, Dad was one of thousands of Mobile boys who heard the Sunday morning radio reports of the Pearl Harbor attack, and within hours signed up for duty. Such an incredible generation. He was soon called to Navy boot camp, then selected for the Naval Academy. Mom followed to Mary Washington College, and they were married after 3 years, accelerated still, although the war had ended. But they were married in 1946 on his graduation day in Annapolis. He had an excellent junior officer career, including outstanding tactical planning for the 6th Fleet in the Med with his Naval Academy roommate, Dr. Beatty, and advanced quickly from blimps to props to jets. In a slow carrier-based attack bomber at the time, he would have been the first flight launched if President Kennedy hadn't convinced the Soviets to end the Cuban Missile Crisis. One of my earliest memories is our fully loaded station wagon not far from where Captain Ms. Zacharias lived, ready to depart an obvious missile target if the naval blockade and other leverage we're just learning about did not work. After Naval War College in 1965, Dad deployed aboard the USS Independence with A6A intruders of the Sunday Punchers Squadron. He and Bill Schuette were shot down bombing a bridge in North Vietnam in July 1965, a bridge I don't think we ever actually knocked down, when it built by the French very well. When he arrived in what became the Hanoi Hilton, he was the senior officer of only a dozen or so prisoners at the time. Jerry Denton took command based on the code of conduct, which was only established after Korea and the problems in prison camps through that experience. They developed the code of conduct. As a young naval officer, I had no idea it was that new. So based on the code of conduct and based on tactical instruction, he received survival training, which we know as the SEER program. Survive, evade, resist, escape. That was it, the code of conduct and SEER. That framework gave them purpose, unity, and perseverance. Soon after, two slightly more senior officers were captured. Dad's Naval Academy classmate, Jim Stockdale, later Admiral Stockdale, followed by later General Robbie Reisner of the U.S. Air Force, and all too many others. By the way, as classmates, Jim Stockdale was only senior to Dad and therefore was obligated to take command whenever he could because of his GPA. They received millennial numbers, same classmates, similar careers, so it went down to GPA, and it really mattered. The practical operations of communications, intelligent, and active resistance, see, they were military units still, required very tough leadership, often involving life-threatening situations. For various reasons, these officers, Denton, Stockdale, and Reisner, alternated or collaborated their leadership, and it was extraordinary. Beyond each being an excellent individual officer, Stockdale was a stoic philosopher. You know, he was going to endure what he had to endure. He was Epictetus, and he wrote all about it afterwards. Reisner and Dad they always felt like and led like they were doing God's work. And that was a very powerful leadership, a foundation of leadership, that combination between the three of those. They were all highly intelligent and tough as nails. Their leadership included highly disciplined orders, tapped through cement walls in a simplified new code to maintain fighting strength as best they could. They saw right away that captors intended to use POWs as strong propaganda devices. These men would have nothing of it. Torture and starvation was frequently used, but their leadership prevailed. Leadership like ordering hunger strikes. Let me say this slowly. Leadership like ordering hunger strikes among undernourished prisoners to get a comrade out of torture that they could hear across the camp. Leadership like ordering men not to escape if it threatened other prisoners, not to accept early release before anyone who was shot down earlier than you were, and to bounce back was the phrase. Bounce back was the command. When you had been broken by torture, which everybody was at one point or another, including our father. So bounce back when you'd been broken by torture, so they had to torture you again before they could get anything else out of you. And one order Dad was most proud of, which I learned from George McKnight, who was a prisoner right next door to his cell, as was Ed Davis at a different time, and with equal respect. George said that he tapped to Dad through the cement wall that he could not take it anymore. He was going to break. He was going to do whatever they asked him to do. He was going to sell his mother out, whatever. He was going to give him a confession for things he didn't do. Dad told him, "You go in there and tell him I ordered you to do it. And they'll come get me instead." And that's exactly what they did. Now that is leadership. And no, with all due respect to John McCain, who I often get asked about, he did his duty as a POW. I've met him a few times, so I don't know him well. I respect him, but he was not a senior officer among this group that was leading. He followed as he should. That was his job, and he certainly gets my respect from it. But he's not really among this group. That leadership was quickly noticed by the Vietnamese, because they were trying to actively working to get propaganda. So they tortured many until they got the names of the 11 strongest resistors who were exiled to a special section of the Hanoi Hilton, later dubbed Alcatraz. I brought a sketch by one of the prisoners. It's back on the back table. Except those who gave their lives, no other POWs endured anything like what happened in Alcatraz. They were known as the Alcatraz Gang. Their names were Coker, Denton, Johnson, now longtime Congressman Sam Johnson from Texas, McKnight, Captain Jim Mulligan, Rutledge, Howie Rutledge, Bob Shoemaker, Stockdale, Tanner, and Ron Storrs, who gave his life there in a cell for our country and their country. They lived in solitary confinement for 4 years in a 4x9 box. 23 hours and 50 minutes a day in a 4x9 box. It was tall enough for them. Half the 4 feet was a cement ledge where they put a reed mat. Now, of course, as Americans, particularly modern day Americans, it's hard to imagine that. But of course, many Vietnamese had very mean circumstances as well. They had no heat, no water, no electricity. When not in leg irons, they used a bucket for a toilet, and it stayed in the tiny cell with them. They were let out of the cell one at a time for 10 minutes per day to dump their bucket and wash, and hopefully communicate. Again, they did this for 4 years and still maintained command. Within their, as far as they could communicate, they still commanded. During that time, Admiral Stockdale actually was extracted for about 2 years, and they didn't know he was alive. He was kept so carefully isolated from everyone else. And Dad and Reisner alternated, as I recall, just those two alternated command depending on who was physically capable. Back home during Dad's grueling Vietnam years, Jane Denton was raising 7 children by herself on military pay. She had to learn many things outside the role of women in that day. She was widely known as a strong, quiet leader who evoked love, faith, and even humor. Is that fair? Is that pretty much how she was known? Okay. That's a pretty good endorsement. She relied on faith, family, friends, and the Navy community in that order. When it was the worst, she was at Mass or leading us in the Rosary, where she found great comfort and strength. She was a founder, among others, of National League of Families to support the other POW families, inform the public, and keep attention on the POW situation. They created the black and white POW MIA flag, still used today, many bumper stickers. I can't tell you how many envelopes I licked as a child, and the ubiquitous POW bracelets worn by many thousands around the country, including, I'm sure, many in this room. She communicated with senior military and government officials with great authority and impact. Her faith in God and country and our military, through all the stuff you see we saw on TV. Her faith in God and country and our military never wavered despite the social turmoil at home and receiving only the slightest communication from Dad. A sample of a letter, it's an original letter I bought here today, and back there you can take a look at it. It's basically an index card with 7 or 8 lines, fit as much tiny lettering as you can on there. This one happened to be about me, so I got that original. As a 6th child, you don't get much of the cool stuff from the family treasures. She did all this while raising these 7 kids over those 7 years plus. Bob Dole just sponsored a museum to be built just for the POW wives, by the way, in Kansas. It's led by Heath Lee, I believe, is the curator, who was wonderful. She's writing a book about the wives that'll be out soon, and they really deserve it. So going back to Vietnam, after 4 years and the Sante raid, which nearly rescued POWs from an unpredictably evacuated camp, we almost got them out, but they ran out. The well went dry. So they moved the prisoners because they didn't have water. And that's the only reason why the Sante raid didn't win, according to the best intelligence we know today. So after that shocked the North Vietnamese into reconsolidating everyone. They had kind of spread them out to divide and conquer, and they brought everybody back together. And following the death of Ho Chi Minh, torture generally stopped. So Dad and other leaders enjoyed fairly routine POW operations until release. Outside of the POW community, Dad is known best for the TV interview he did as a POW, and then his speech when he first returned. The reason why he made the speech, by the way, they loaded by shoot-down date. Dad was one of the earliest shoot-down. He happened to be the most senior guy on the first plane. That's why he was the first. That's why he was given the honor of speaking, and to an audience at 1 or 2 in the morning East Coast time, which ended up being exactly what the country needed to hear. We'll see that interview and his speech in just a moment. But it was his leadership that validated these two highly visible events. After Vietnam, he served in the Senate as a Republican from Alabama, believe it or not. That was unbelievable at the time when he won. Focused on major policy issues, including foreign affairs and the threat of communism in South and Central America that still lurked in the 80s. He was in from 80 to 86. While still in the Senate, he founded a humanitarian organization that moved medical equipment around the world, including Vietnam. Before I close, that's his story. He actually never liked to tell that story. I had to add that this morning because we just didn't tell that story because he wanted to get on to other things. So before I close, I think it's critical to understand that our parents learned to love this country because she deserves our love. Tough, committed, active, dedicated, forgiving love. And that their deep Christian formation was vital to their lives. Dad often said that his faith saved him in many ways, including a miracle he heard and felt on the floor of a torture cell. Ask me about that later, if there's time. To fully appreciate Dad's courageous service, one must understand that Dad forged together faith, family, and freedom. Faith, family, and freedom. That's what he was really about. Into a single steeled force, each vital to protect the other. It was what he was fighting for in the air, the cells, the Senate, and in humanitarian projects around the world. He knew the personal sacrifice required. He gave more than his measure for decades on end, and he calls upon all of us to do the same, whether in combat, in the sanctity of a quiet church pew, or in a private voting booth. When he said, "God bless America," in front of the world at Clark Air Force Base, he was praying to preserve the country as one nation under God. He believed that disguising that divine reality was the greatest threat to the survival of these United States of America. And to defend it was the greatest cause. Of course, he was far from perfect, as anyone who knew him can tell you. We all weathered a fleeting storm of intense emotion and usually directed to immediate action. Our mother ensured he was able to take dramatic action during a dramatically divisive time where he felt so driven to do so. It's easy for the rest of us to see greatness and hold it afar as if it's unattainable. But if Dad or Mom were here right now, they would implore each of you to stand up and fight. In the best way you can for this country. Remember, they were raised no different than you. It's very difficult for us to imagine ourselves capable of greatness, but you are capable of greatness, and that greatness is always needed. Indeed, today in this country, so many values are being changed that the nation's changing in very difficult ways. And whatever you can do, privately or in the public forum, it's needed. The best way I can convey this inspiration directly from Dad is to paraphrase his May 1980 commencement speech at VMI, when he said these words that still apply all too well, quote, Never has this nation, never has this world experienced a moment in history when there was a greater need for people like you. The world suffers from this fevered sickness of unprincipled materialism. Our nation, faced with the foreign dangers posed by international threats and the domestic danger of internal decay, needs you. All mankind with aspirations for freedom, with compassion, needs you. This nation and the world needs nothing more than those who will subordinate self to noble cause, those who will seek to work and serve, who will preserve and who will persevere in sacrifice, those who will search always for the truth, no matter how tough it is, those who treasure self-respect and despise inconsiderate self-indulgence. America needs those who recognize her relative goodness, who are willing to commit themselves to be placed in harm's way if called upon to protect her vital interests, end quote. The best way to learn the whole story on Dad is to read his book, When Hell's in Session, which is back there. You can get it on Amazon. I don't get a penny. Read Defiant by Alvin Townley, specifically for the history of the Alcatraz gang alone. It's a fairly new book. Or read the definitive Vietnam POW history titled Honor Bound. The samples are all back there. I also highly recommend the recent 55-minute documentary entitled Jeremiah, which was supposed to be a big biography, but it turned out to be basically the POW story, a little bit more. And we'll see a moment of that in a second. It's received numerous very distinguished awards. It's available online through Alabama Public TV. It's shown periodically on national PBS and was just selected for international PBS broadcast. I'll close now by getting us to this clip of my mom briefly, and then Dad. If there are questions, I'll take questions if there's time, including what I think about the Ken Burns documentary. That's a teaser. My entire family thanks you for inviting me here today and to hear our story. God bless America. Thank you. As we cue this up, what you're going to see first is my mother, and I think it's just important just to get a sense for the kind of person that she was after I said all these nice things about her. She is my mother. So 60 Minutes after Dad was interviewed, was seen by this Japanese interviewer, it was pretty notable. So TV came in, did a 60 Minutes brief interview with her. You'll see the early one, and then you'll see one right before he's released. So we kind of jump from one to the other, and then we'll go into a more formal thing. Go ahead.
One of the prisoners on the way home tonight is Navy Captain Jeremiah Denton of Virginia Beach, Virginia. David Colleen talked to Denton's wife Jane back in 1971, and again the day after the war ended. At the first interview, she recalled the day in 1965 when she got the news that her husband had been captured.
It's a Sunday afternoon, and I was here with two of my children, and the doorbell rang. It was a naval officer whom we had known for some time with his wife, and my son came upstairs and said, "Mama, this naval officer is here." I knew what he wanted, because I knew he was the one that would have come to tell me. So I just walked downstairs really stunned and stood there and looked at him, and he said, it's all right, meaning he's not dead. I didn't know. In fact, he said he was indeed a prisoner and his picture was released. It's something you don't anticipate. I knew he was going to war, and I knew he could have been killed, but somehow I had never really thought about him as a prisoner. I think it's like anything. We never expect the worst to happen to us. So I was in shock. I did expect, though, that the war would be over before very long, and that was July of 1965. effects of the war, you know, what the country's been through, what friends have been through, all the people that have been lost. Just, it's torn us up in this country, and I don't know, but no one seems able to really celebrate. There's a relief and a deep happiness, a quiet happiness.
But not this sense of just cutting loose.
Yeah.
What do you anticipate as things that you have to cope with?
Well, of course, getting to know an entirely different family. We have a large family, 7 children. They've grown up. 4 of them have literally grown up. They're men now. And then the 3 who were quite young when he left are in high school, and the youngest is 9 years old. She was 18 months when her father left. So essentially, he's coming back and meeting an entirely new family. I've changed some too. I hope he'll think for the better, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Now, this is an excerpt, a 12-minute excerpt from the documentary Jeremiah.
We've been contacted by Navy, and they said that there would be a news segment on that night that my father had been interviewed.
Well, we were just the family, you know, clustered together in the den in that house on Watergate Lane. You know, as I recall, it came on the regular news about 6 o'clock in the evening. You know, it came on, and it was horrifying to us because he did not look good. He looked really bad.
I was struck at first by the way he walked into the room, and he did that little bow, little half bow, which was very foreign to me and seemed very strange. He looked smaller, you know, and he was larger than life, and to see him on the small screen and much, you know, having lost a lot of weight, he looked terrible. And he was terrible.
My mother shrieked, "Bastards!" when she saw his appearance on that tank.
He also looked a little shaky, but determined to get through this and to answer the questions. He listened intently.
I thought he'd been in some sort of a dungeon sort of thing, and he was looking at these key intellects or whatever you call them, and he was just blinded by them.
The disconcerting thing was the, you know, the dazed look, the confusion of it, this strange blinking, which, and the rolling of the eyes and so on, left one thinking, you know, he's not in a good place, so to speak. Then again, what he said, that was the exhilarating part.
No, I don't know what is happening, but whatever the position of my government is, I support it fully. Well, whatever the position of my government is, I believe in it. Yes, sir. I'm a member of that government, and it is my job to support it, and I will as long as I live.
We all were smart enough, even young kids at that age, to know that this is going to be a problem for him.
There's Jeremiah Denton with his lights on him, with a television audience, and he says what he wants to say. He says what he feels he needs to say about supporting the American government, the American cause. What he also does is blink out the word torture in Morse code with his eyelids as he's saying these very defined, very difficult, very dangerous answers. He's blinking. Torture.
Session where you blink torture, a lot of people said, wow, that was great, you know, and maybe said he's going to suffer a lot of repercussion, but to me, having been through, you know, somewhat similar experiences, is is the courage and the wherewithal to put aside that and say, I've got a little thing I got to do right here in the middle of this terrible chaos and pain and pressure and stress. Is that he was able to focus for a few minutes and do something totally outside the box. That's the part of that that really impresses the heck out of me.
I was so pleased that, under the duress that he was in, that he had the composure, to get that message out, because at that time, everybody believed that we were receiving good treatment, and that was far from the case.
One of the prisoners on the way home tonight is Navy Captain Jeremiah Denton of Virginia Beach, Virginia. David Culhane talked to Denton's wife Jane back in 1971, and again the day after the war ended. At the first interview, she recalled the day in 1965 when she got the news that her husband had been captured.
It's a Sunday afternoon, and I was here with two of my children, and the doorbell rang. It was a naval officer whom we had known for some time with his wife, and my son came upstairs and said, Mother, this naval officer is here. I knew what he wanted, because I knew he was the one that would have come to tell me. So I just walked downstairs really stunned and stood there and looked at him, and he said, it's all right, meaning he's not dead. I didn't know, in fact, he said he was indeed a prisoner and his picture was released. It's something you don't anticipate. I knew he was going to war, and I knew he could have been killed, but somehow I had never really thought about him as a prisoner. I think it's like anything. We never expect the worst to happen to us. So I was in shock. I did expect, though, that the war would be over before very long, and that was July 1965.
All the POWs had places that, was home to them, or the places they intended to make their home later. Dad's was pretty specific. It was waters around Mobile Bay. He got to go home. He got to go to Mobile. He dreamed about it, and Mom was going to support that. Go down to Mobile, we're celebrities down there. Strangely, with all the things that other Vietnam veterans were not getting, we're getting this strange concentration of adoration.
When I met him for the first time, he was, a public figure. So I knew him sort of as a hero, mostly. We went to parades and mobiles for him, and it was sort of a whirlwind, really.
The country was changed when I came back. It was a disaster for me. It took me a year to figure out what was wrong. Okay? After a year, I finally figured out that the country had changed dramatically.
I think it's fair to say Dad was pretty consumed with doing whatever it is that he felt God wanted him to do to better the world. And the world he came back to after Vietnam, he saw as not an improvement.
We have been in the process of attaining a great degree of luxury, degrees of luxury which distract us some, and we are concerned with such matters as wraparound octophonic sound in our automobiles and so forth. We're becoming quite sophisticated with respect to non-necessities. This has happened to nations in the past, and it is my belief that man can cope with adversity, and that his most difficult problem is coping with prosperity.
felt pressure to do something about that. And so I think that's part of the anxiety and the tension that he went through, and I think it has a lot to do with why he decided to go into the political arena.
Who will ever forget that night when we waited for television to bring us the scene of that first plane landing at Clark Field in the Philippines, bringing our POWs home. The plane door opened, and Jeremiah Denton came slowly down the ramp. He caught sight of our flag, saluted it, said, "God bless America," and then thanked us for bringing him home.
He wasn't a politician in the sense of being a professional politician. He was attempting to achieve several objectives, and that was the only reason he was in the Senate. I happened to be down in Alabama on a fishing trip with him, and I met his mother. And I said, has it ever occurred to you that Jerry is a complicated person? She said, he was always like that. I said, you mean it wasn't the prison? She said, no.
In a way, it's kind of hard to put your finger on it, but he was just a solid man who had great faith and great beliefs in the things that he grew up with in his country, his family, a great deal of love. And trying to explain to people, you know, your beliefs and your faith is what will sustain you through anything.
He was a fighter all the way through his life, you know, and I think he, by being a fighter, and I think he came from I think I'm right on this, came from a divorced set of parents. I think that gave him a lot of strength to fight and a lot of compassion for the underdog. I think he felt that it wasn't the POWs that were the heroes. Instead, it was the guy that got drafted and realized that his loved ones back home, you know, were being discriminated against.
The main hero of Vietnam in the war was not necessarily the POW at all, but for example, a young black walking point at night in the danger-filled jungle in South Vietnam, while our country was torn by anti-war and racial issues. That man, to me, is a real hero of faith.
About a year before he died, my wife and I visited him and his second wife, Mary Bell. And as we were getting ready to leave, he and Mary Bell, as they always did, walked us to our car to see us off. And as I was pulling out of the driveway, I looked back and noticed he was standing at full attention and saluting us as we left. And the journey of our relationship together over the years, there were ups and downs. There were times when he would question, you know, my ideas, and I would question his ideas. We did become much closer. We found that we had a great deal of common ground. And to have him saluting me was something that was very moving to me, both indicating respect and also maybe a little bit of a reminder of what he stood for.